Hey, welcome back. In this series, we're going to be talking about endocrinology or the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is, oh my God, vastly complicated. It is an entire field in and of itself. It is a specialty that I would say very few people truly understand well. And it's, to that real medical level. So we're just going to touch on the basic functions of some of our most important hormones and talk about just a few different things that can go wrong as we transition then into our reproductive system, because there is quite a bit of a tie-in between the two. So hopefully you will enjoy learning about the system a little bit more. All right. So as we get started, let's talk about what hormones are. So hormones are organic chemical messengers produced and released by special glands. Okay, these are going to be released into the bloodstream where they act on some target hormones at some distance from their origin. And this will be the classic endocrine type of signaling. We'll talk about a couple of other types that don't necessarily travel very far at all from the cells that produce them, but they're still considered part of the endocrine system. What's important here is that hormones are going to coordinate physiology and behavior along with bodily functions. So, for example, and that's really important because at the same time that you hit a certain age and your body has grown to a certain point, it's not only important that your body has become, for example, reproductively ready for procreation. However, behavior itself has to also change. So hormones are what's going to help make sure that those two things sync up. So not just your anatomy, but also your physiology. Let me just give you a little bit of a historical perspective on endocrinology. As far as a lot of these fields go, it's, I guess getting close to 200 years now. But the first experiment was actually, well, I shouldn't say the first experiment. More accurately, the experiment that kind of clinched that the idea that hormones are having their effect via circulation in the bloodstream from an organ versus, say, the nervous system was clinched back in 1849 by Arnold Adolf Berthold. He's considered to be the father of endocrinology. And he did this very simple, elegant experiment. For years, I mean, dating back to, way early on in human development, ancient Egyptian times, Greek times, whatever, people knew that if you castrated male animals like bulls or horses, or they didn't really do it with dogs, but like horses and bulls, that you would get geldings or animals that were much more behave very differently than their intact counterparts, right? And they would do this with even roosters to form something called a capon. So a capon is biologically a male rooster that has been castrated. So it grows up to be basically like a very large hen. So it gives more meat, but has a better flavor to it than roosters, and it doesn't fight like roosters do. They won't crow like roosters do, and they don't have that typical rooster appearance either. They take on much more of a hen-like appearance. So anyway, long story short, people forever knew that there was something there within the testes that allowed for a masculinization effect on animals. But what they didn't know was whether or not it was endocrine based, so again, something via the bloodstream, or if it was neurologically based, right? So something that the nerves released. And around this time in the late, or I guess mid 1800s, there was quite a bit of disagreement in the literature and the scientific community about what was actually having this effect. So what Arnold did was he took baby chickens, particularly baby males, and he separated them into 3 different groups. And then what he did at the first group is this is their control group. He castrated them, and then what he found was that sure enough, all the chicks in group 1 that he castrated grew up normal capons. Again, these adult males that look like and behave like females. Now, the second group, where he took chicks, he also castrated them, but instead of taking out the testes and just discarding them, he simply put the testes back into the abdominal wall, like into the abdominal cavity, I should say. And lo and behold, unlike those chicks in group 1, these groups in group 2 grew up with normal male features, normal male behaviors, everything normal male. And so this showed that, okay, well, wait a second. I literally severed these organs, put them back, and still they function. So what's going on? And when he did kill these animals, and then he took a look inside, he did see that those testes that were once removed, because he put them back into the abdominal cavity, they were able to reestablish a blood supply. Because again, that digestive tract in the abdominal cavity is very vascular. So simply they reestablished a blood supply and they continued to function. So this led some folks to go, well, maybe you didn't do it right. It could still be via the nervous system. You didn't properly castrate them. You didn't remove it properly. So he said, okay, look. So there's to show you that this is definitely something that's in the bloodstream and not something via the nervous system. And there can be no doubt that I did this correctly, that I didn't miss something. He's took a third group of separate chicks, right? And what he did is he castrated them. So he castrated this little chick, he castrated that little chick, and then he gave the testes from this chick to that one, and the one from that one to this one, right? So now there can be no doubt that everything that was, associated with the testes has been severed. And sure enough, both of these chicks grew up to be normal male roosters, again, in behavior and in appearance. So what he showed beyond a shadow of a doubt was that there was some factor, some hormone circulating in the bloodstream that was causing this effect, and not something that was due to the nervous system or anything else. So this was the first experiment that showed endocrinology, or showed that there were these hormonal, these signaling hormones in the body that travel via the bloodstream to affect both behavior as well as appearance in animals. So it's kind of a cool little experiment. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit more about our signaling. So all of these are ways that hormones may be used in signaling. It just depends on basically the distance that it is from the cell that is secreting the hormone is the type of signaling that it is considered. So you can either have intracrine signaling, autocrine signaling, paracrine, our classic endocrine, which is what we're going to spend most of our time talking about, as well as exocrine. And we've also already seen some paracrine signaling in the digestive system, where we had certain hormones helping to stimulate the cells nearby. But let's just give you a better idea of these other hormones. Just put back my little square. Okay, let's see how well I can do this. So in intracrine signals, these are physiological signals that will influence the same cells that secrete them by binding to intracellular receptors. So in intracrine signals, a cell is making a hormone, and it's never actually released outside of the cell. It actually stays inside the cell, but it upregulates the activity of the organelles inside the cell itself. Okay. Now autocrine signaling is going to be very similar. But these are, I'll try typing so it's a little bit more real time for you, are physiological signals that are secreted outside the cell and stimulate the same cell that released them. Okay, so the difference between intracrine and autocrine, again, is that intracrine is never actually released outside the cell. It's just functioning inside. Autocrine, the hormone, is actually released outside the cell, and it feeds back onto the cell that produced it to have whatever the effect is. Let's see. And then paracrine signaling. So these are physiological signals that are secreted outside the cell and affect nearby cells. Okay? So these are signals that, again, they're released by a cell, but they're localized. So these have a localized effect around them. They're not traveling a large distance away. Now, endocrine, let's see, hopefully this is not jumping around too much for you. So endocrine signaling, these are physiological signals that are produced by specialized cells, as are all these other ones, and released into the bloodstream, which carries them to target cells some distance away. And so this may be a group of cells in the adrenal, being released from the adrenal gland, that go on to affect the heart, some larger distance away. So it's not nearby, it's not local, it's not a few cells over like we would see in paracrine. Rather, it is being dispersed throughout the body, possibly affecting multiple regions of the body. But again, it's being taken by the bloodstream some distance away. And then exocrine signaling. So these are physiological signals. Again, these will be produced by specialized cells, but these are physiological signals that are secreted into the external environment of the organism, if I can spell. So your exocrine signalings are released outside of the body, not just the cell, but they are being released out into the atmosphere somewhere. So these would typically be your pheromones that are going to attract a mate, especially in animals, although there is lots of evidence to suggest that humans can pick up on pheromones as well. But anyway, so that's exocrine. So you can see going from intracrine to exocrine, we're basically increasing the distance from where the signals are going to travel. So an intracrine never leaves the cell and only influences the organelles inside the cell. Autocrine is released outside of the cell, but just feeds back to influence the cell that secreted it. Paracrine affects nearby cells. Exocrine goes into the bloodstream and can affect any cells, of the body potentially. And then exocrine is released outside the body itself. And the idea is that there's some signaling that is to attract another individual organism, right? Okay, some more background sort of general features of the endocrine system. We have 5 different main features. First of all, glands are ductless, so they do not have ducts. The contents are secreted directly into the bloodstream, so there is no need for a duct. And remember, the reason why we have a duct, those are for exocrine glands. So the idea there is that these are very specific secretions that only need to go to a very specific spot. So for example, like saliva, we only want that going into the mouth. We don't need that traveling throughout the body, right? Tears, we only want those on the eyes. Again, we don't need that going down to your big toe, so we don't send it into the bloodstream. Endocrine glands, however, those are going to be, again, these chemical signaling that we potentially want every cell of the body to be exposed to them. So again, no ducts, because we don't want it going to a specific spot. We want it going into the bloodstream in general. This then means that endocrine glands have to have a very rich blood supply. And again, since every cell of the body, or almost every cell of the body, is going to be somewhere near a capillary bed, this means that hormones can travel to almost any cell in the body. But the thing is, not every hormone will have an effect on every single body part. The key thing is that there has to be the right receptor. So if there is no receptor, there is no effect. And I cannot stress to you how important this concept is. You can produce as much of a hormone as you want, but if you do not have the receptor for it, it will not matter. Okay, so those receptors will either be found on the surface of the cell, on the cell membrane, or somewhere inside the cell, sometimes right on the inside the nucleus of the cell. I'll just give you a fun little anecdotal way of remembering, hopefully, this concept of no receptor, no effect. So birds can eat really, really, really hot chili peppers with no like burning sensation. I think we all recognize we eat jalapenos and even hotter peppers, like ghost chili peppers and even hotter ones than that. Those are gonna like, they are super spicy. They burn our mouths. And not only that, if you get on your fingers and you rub your eyes, it will burn your eyes. And then like the next day it burns on its way out too. We have capsaicin receptors throughout our digestive tract and even on our eyes and our mucous membranes. So that if we touch that, it ends up giving us a burning sensation. Now, birds lack that capsaicin receptor completely. So to them, when you give that pepper, it doesn't taste hot at all. It simply tastes like any kind of like a bell pepper would, which is absolutely an amazing thing. Like if you, and don't do this, but if you were to like pepper spray a bird, it would not be stingy to them. They would just be like, oh, thank you for this lovely mist. And this is sort of an evolutionary arms race in peppers. The seeds of a pepper plant, as they pass through a bird's digestive system, are not destroyed. So the pepper plant, this is a beautiful thing. Bird can eat it, disperse its seeds in its feces, right, over the land. In humans and other mammals, our digestive tracts do destroy those seeds. So pepper plants have evolved to have this burning capsaicin to sort of discourage mammals from eating it, because we do not provide any kind of benefit in seed dispersal. Jokes on pepper plants, we tend to like the burning sensation, but most other mammals do not, so they stay away from them. Anyway, kind of a cool fun fact. If you have no receptor, there is no effect of that hormone. All right, and I will stop there and continue on this section in another lecture so we can kind of keep these videos a little shorter for you. All right, as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.